We all got a little bit excited when we saw those unemployment figures yesterday. The headline's great, but are you concerned about a few of the underlying issues, underemployment, and of course that feeding into slow wages growth?
No, not really. I mean, you should never make too much of a single month's figure. And this one was, it seems, affected by the coincidence between the week in which the survey was taken and the Easter and school holidays. There was a very big increase in the number of people who were taking leave. That is, they were, as far as they were concerned, employed, but actually working 0 hours. We saw this, of course, happen in a much bigger way in January as well. But the increase in the number of people reporting that they were employed but not working any hours, and not for economic reasons, but for other reasons, that was much larger than in other years, 2015 and 2018, when the April labour force survey coincided with the Easter and school holidays. So I don't think we should read too much into it. At face value, it does seem as though the loss of jobs in the weeks following the termination of JobKeeper, which had been forecast by Treasury perhaps to be in excess of 100, though less than 150,000. The impact hasn't been nearly as big as that, and there's other evidence to support that contention as well, including the decline in the number of people on the job seeker payment over the 4 weeks following the termination of JobKeeper. So, I'm not unduly concerned about this. The unemployment rate fell mainly because of a drop in the number of people participating in the workforce, but we did see further declines in both underemployment and underutilisation of the labour force. So that's an encouraging trend. The other point that's important to understand in this context, Laura, is that because of the closure of our borders, which we're being told is likely to remain until mid-2022 at the earliest, you don't need to create as many jobs as used to be required in order to get the unemployment rate to go down. So, with the working age population now only growing by a bit under 9,000 a month instead of 26 or 27,000 a month as it had been before the onset of the pandemic, you only need to create an average of about 5,500 jobs a month in order to get the unemployment rate to fall, assuming no change in the labour force participation rate. And that's pretty easy to do, especially when you consider one of the other implications of the continued closure of our borders, the ban on Australians travelling overseas. That means that the more than $50 billion per annum that Australians would have been spending overseas if we were a free country is instead being forcibly diverted to spending at home, and quite a significant amount of that has been spent at home, on homes, on cars, on clothing, on cosmetics, even on booze, and that is helping to offset, in fact more than offset, the spending that we're not getting from migrants, tourists and foreign students in Australia. It's more than offsetting that. In a sense, the closure of our borders, necessary though it might have been over the last 12 months for health grounds, is increasingly looking like a form of protectionism of the sort that Australia employed from Federation until the late 1980s. We forced Australians to spend money that they might have preferred to spend on imported goods and services, on domestically made goods, and in the short term, that created jobs and had other positive, I suppose, psychological effects in the sense that we were able to call ourselves a manufacturing country. But while we were doing that, we, of course, went from being the richest country in the world, as we were along with New Zealand and Argentina at the time of Federation, to, by the time we realised that this was a pretty dopey idea, being about the 26th richest in the world, and on our way, as Paul Keating famously said, to being a banana republic. In the same way, this de facto protectionism that the continued closure of our borders is in effect creating, despite warnings from, health experts like Nick Coatsworth and Brett Sutton that it's ultimately unsustainable, this form of protectionism is temporarily creating jobs and making things look rosier than they are. But the longer we keep up with it, the greater the, I think, ultimate detraction from our living standards over the longer term.